Good afternoon. My name is Malcolm Graham, the coordinator of the City of Charlotte Housing Community Recovery Task Force, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to our meeting. This is our first meeting in about 3 weeks, so welcome back, everyone, to our Recovery Task Force meeting. I apologize for the delay. We had a couple of technical difficulties that we're still trying to figure out, but I'm mindful of everyone's time, and so we would like to move forward. Just a quick update. The objectives of the task force are as follows: to anticipate and plan for Charlotte post-recovery challenge as it relates to COVID-19, to listen to the community regarding the challenges people are facing, develop recommendations for how the City of Charlotte, specifically the City Council, can pivot to support changes needed as a result of COVID-19, and to provide residents with a long-term vision for a healthy and stable economic and civic environment. We'd like to start off by introducing our task force members, starting with our council members. So if you could introduce yourselves so that the public would know who is here with us this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Larkin Eggleston, City Council District 1.
Braxton Winston at large.
And Mrs. Johnson is still trying to get on, so we'll go to the task force members.
Lee Cochran, Laurel Street.
Kathy Cummings, Bank of America.
Brett Dotson with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing Partnership.
Hi, this is Anthony Lindsay with Caldwell Banker and North Carolina Real Estate Commission.
Good afternoon. This is Deronda Metz with the Salvation Army, representing the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Continuum of Care for those that are homeless.
Good afternoon. This is Connie Staudinger, Housing Development Properties. Sole member is in Libyan.
I want to thank everyone for being here today. Our staff, if they can introduce themselves.
Victoria Johnson, Assistant City Manager's Office.
Pamela Weidman, Director of the City's Housing and Neighborhood Service. It was related to evictions. And just as a reminder, a lot of the evictions work occurred early on in our time together. The task or the items were to work with the courts to identify if evictions filings were occurring, determine what the scale of eviction hearings would be when the courts would reopen, to work with the courts to improve the evictions process. And so I'll just walk through, if you could go to the next slide, I'll walk through kind of some very brief recommendations that she had. Around items 3A and 3B, working with the courts to identify if the eviction filings were still occurring and determining what the scale of evictions would be when the courts reopen. You all recall that we had several very informative guest speakers to come in early on and talk with us through that. And so we did a lot of work up front. And so Mrs. Graham didn't have any recommendations around those two particular items. However, she did have recommendations around working item 3C, working with the courts to improve the evictions process over the long term. We know that evictions are just not occurring as it relates to COVID, but that they will continue to occur. And so her recommendation was providing additional resources, allocating additional resources for the cities. So if you go to the next slide so that the public can see it, the recommendation was to allocate additional resources for the city's dispute settlement program, which occurs out of our community relations department, to increase staff, build out a marketing campaign, recruit and train additional volunteers, engage in evaluation specialists to assess the effectiveness of the program, and to add a component for commercial tenant and landlord mediation. If we go to the next slide, working with the courts to improve the evictions process, the desired outcome here is to have greater efficiencies and to reduce costs for all parties. And so her recommendation really centers around the council adding some language to their legislative agenda around post-judgment relief agreements. And basically what she's proposing is that the legislation, add language such that the legislation provides greater protections for tenants who experience evictions so that when they settle the judgment, that the judgment is removed from their records once it's satisfied, and that would help them in future searches for housing there. If you go to the next slide, this one is really around reentry and ex-offenders who live with family members. And what she found doing her work is that often when someone is living with relatives or in a household where they do have a history as an ex-offender, that the entire household is evicted because of that. And so the recommendation is really about training rental property owners to understand how to evaluate the ex-offender applicants to reduce rejection or evictions. And so what she recommends is just a campaign to educate the community about the issue, and really more so with landlords so that they would have a little more grace in terms of evaluating what the ex-offender's offense is. And so with that, those were the 3 or so recommendations that came out of that work. I will pause there. If you have questions or concerns, I'll turn it over to Mr. Graham for how he wants those to be handled.
Thank you, Ms. Whiteman, and we'll take questions for those who have them, and welcome Councilmember Winston.
Thank you. Just wondering, from a process standpoint, this ex-offenders portion is very important. I think from a council perspective, there might be some horizontal, I guess, integration with this. I mean, this relates to not just housing, but in terms of our crime prevention and violence interruption type of work, and of course our intergovernmental. This would need an intergovernmental approach. So I wonder, from my council colleagues and task force members, is this something that we might want to look deeper into if council wants to take more of a lobby for different changes on the federal or state level for this recommendation?
I tend to agree with you. I think it's one that certainly I would like to proceed with as well. And obviously, it touches on areas that we don't have direct jurisdiction with. So you're right, Councilmember Winston, the appropriate jurisdiction probably would fall within your committee, the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, and as we prepare our legislative agenda, both federally and statewide, for the 2021 calendar year. Lee, welcome, Lee.
Thank you very much. 2 questions, actually, I'll make one comment before I go to my question, just because based on that last exchange, I did want to make sure it's clear that I think the recommendation is related to something that did already change at the federal level. A couple of years ago, there was a pretty big change around how HUD, the guidance from HUD from a fair housing perspective as to what landlords could do in terms of denying folks for criminal background. So I think the recommendation is appropriate in the sense of making sure landlords, folks that use good professional property management companies have updated their requirements to be in compliance. But I think it's probably true that many rental owners who don't know about the change or don't have property management companies that know about the change are probably not following it. So I think there's 2 pieces to this. One is just getting out the word on what the changes have already happened, and then alternatively, if there's additional action at the federal state level that people think is appropriate to go beyond that. So, but that was a quick comment.
Lee, do you know if a state law caught up with that, or if there's any kind of discrepancy between state and federal law on that right now?
I don't know. I'm the wrong person to answer this, but my assumption would be that the federal would trump the state because it is a fair I believe it's an interpretation of fair housing. So I don't think the state law could be more restrictive, but I probably am the wrong, I shouldn't probably answer because I'm not sure.
Ms. Whiteman?
Yeah, and Mr. Cochran, thank you for saying that. You're right, in 2016, HUD did issue some guidance, and the guidance really requires rental owners to evaluate ex-offenders on a case-by-case basis and not just apply that blanket rejection. In talking with Ms. Graham, the recommendation is really about doing just what you and Mr. Whiston talked about. It's really about doing this robust campaign so that landlords who are not as familiar with HUD like you and folks at CMHP and other people who interact with HUD all the time, so that they know what they can and cannot do according to HUD guidelines.
Thank you, Ms. Whiteman. Just want to note for the record that Councilmember Johnson is now with us. Welcome, Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Eggleston, you're up for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm experiencing some of the same technical difficulties with our WebEx app that Ms. Johnson encountered too, so I apologize. I'm trying to watch on Facebook while listening on the phone, and they're not exactly synced up. But I saw on one of the slides, maybe two of the slides, where the recommendation is for resources. I also don't have great sound quality on this listening in, but did I miss, or was it not said what level of resources we're talking about in terms of, I assume, dollars? And if this is going to be sent from the task force to the full council, will there be a dollar amount attached to the request before it gets to the council? And if so, do we yet know what that dollar amount might be?
Yeah. So, Mr. Eggleston, thank you for the question. At this point, the resources are not very well defined, so there are no dollar amounts at this time. We can go back and dig deeper and determine what level of resources those need to be and put dollar amounts to those prior to those coming to the city council.
So the request that we would consider as a task force would be a general request without a specific dollar amount attached to it, but it would have a dollar amount attached to it before it was to be voted on by the full council?
That's correct, and I'm guessing if we keep with kind of our current state of affairs, if there are full-time equivalents, if there are additional people resources attached to this, that would be taken up in your next budget.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt there's an appetite for us to deploy more resources to these issues, but obviously would have to know what level of resources and where do those dollars come from, and do they take dollars from some other initiative? So just want to make sure we're thinking about that in advance.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Lee, did we get to the bottom of your question, Lee?
Yeah, actually, the actual question I was going to ask was whether the city currently funds, and I'll get the mediation. The first recommendation was about additional resources to the mediation program that we've heard a lot about. And do you know if the city is currently funding that, or what it's or is it primarily county funded?
So Mr. Cochran, just to be sure we're on the same page, are you talking about the recommendation around adding the additional resources, or who funds the city's dispute settlement program?
Yeah, it was the recommendation for additional resources to the settlement program.
Right. So that program is operated out of the city's community relations department, and so that is a city-funded function.
So to some degree, if you wanted to say double it, you kind of know, the city kind of knows how much it costs currently, and would be able to put some it wouldn't be as hard to put numbers around it. If it was funded by someone else and you were trying to figure out how to add on, it might be harder, but you could put some numbers to say, to increase the number by 50%, it would be X dollar. That's something the city could figure out from.
Correct.
Okay.
We will work with Mr. Rashford and his staff to determine what that should look like and what those dollars, what that ask should be.
Okay. I think my general comment is existing programs that you're adding to are always a lot easier to institute quickly. Some of the other recommendations are probably almost like brand new programs that would have to be developed, but that one seems one that it'd be fairly easy to put new dollars to because it's something that already exists.
Correct.
Okay, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Councilman Graham. I just wanted to weigh in on this point of the reentry housing. This is something that my task item will also be addressing in more detail, and we'll be bringing forward recommendations as well around this issue. We will also have some public testimony on this issue at our next meeting. So we'll have a more full discussion around this, and hopefully have an opportunity to kind of dig into a little bit more of the nuance around what some of the issues are. It's great that the HUD policy is in place. There's still a gap in terms of some landlords who are not under that regulation. So we do still need to talk about it. There's also North Carolina Housing Finance Agency has some specific prescriptions around this as well. So there are a number of other places where there is a set of regulations around how this should be handled. And so as I said, we'll be talking further about that as part of the discussion for my task force item on the regulatory and legislative.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Are there any other questions in reference to the recommendations? Can I get a motion to accept them and move them forward to the council?
This is Anthony Lindsay. I move that the recommendations be put forward to council.
Second.
All right, we have a roll call vote. Malcolm Graham, aye. Councilmember Eggleston,
Yes.
Councilmember Johnson,
Actually, I didn't see them, so can I abstain?
that's fine.
Okay.
Councilmember Winston,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran,
Yes.
Ms. Cummings,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Mr. Lindsay,
Yes.
Ms. Metz,
Yes.
Ms. Stallinger, Connie,
Yes.
okay, we will move that forward to the city council. Thank you, Ms. Wyman, for stepping in for Ms. Graham, and Ms. Graham, if you're watching, I want to thank you for your work on this particular recommendation. Now I'd like to pivot to work task 4, which is led by Mr. Lindsay, who will introduce the topic, and then after he does that,
People need to mute their lines.
everyone's muted. Okay, cool. The next topic is task force number 4, introduced by task force member Mr. Lindsay. He will run through the build up to his work, and then after he completes that, I will interject in terms of how the task force will be moving forward based on instructions from the mayor's office. And so, Mr. Lindsay, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Councilman Graham. Appreciate the opportunity to present the information today. Today is really to provide some background and give you all a sense of the approach that was used to address the subject area that was assigned to me as task 4. Next slide, please. So here's a recap sort of the task, the desired outcomes, and what was actually taking place at the time this task was assigned. And I'm going to reiterate the 4 desired outcome, or the 8 rather desired outcomes as I proceed. But the tasks were to evaluate the use of zoning and development policies, including accessory dwelling units, container homes, tiny homes, source of income discrimination. And item B was to address city required building fees, Item C was to add language to the city's fair housing ordinance by adding source of income to a listing of protected classes throughout Chapter 12, Article 5. And so I really took the approach of focusing in on the outcomes because there's a great deal of overlap between these outcomes across the task areas. Next slide, please. So those desired outcomes are listed here. Determine the policies and tools that are best suited to expand the supply of affordable housing, determining what, if any, legislative action is needed to reduce or waive the development fees to facilitate the process of building more affordable housing. Housing Charlotte framework, again, to introduce the source of income discrimination and align local resources with policies that support voucher use. Ensure equitable access to available housing for qualified tenants. Then more effectively or more efficiently provide safe and decent housing to our most vulnerable, which is one of the most critical elements of maintaining household health during this COVID-19 crisis. Then to better utilize the unpredictable and inadequate federal funds that are dedicated to housing vulnerable households. Establish creative, budget-neutral policy for housing solutions in a time of fiscal uncertainty. Then work towards economic mobility, housing choice mobility goals, and opportunity housing goals. Next slide. So in order to approach this, I relied on a vast number of subject matter experts who provided input, and also there's a great deal of input provided by people from the community, stakeholders as well. Some local attorneys also provided input to this process. And in particular, I should also add to this list that the Canopy Realtor Association was instrumental in helping provide information here, as well as the Office of the City Attorney. So these resources, along with several other research resources that I used, for example, the 2020-2025 Charlotte-Mecklenburg Consolidated Plan, the guidelines for evaluation and disposition of city-owned land for affordable housing, the Housing Charlotte Framework document, housing instability and homeless reports, the UNC Urban Institute Strategies for Affordable Housing Development report, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Opportunity Task Force report, which dealt with access to affordable housing, and the Evergreen Team Task Force Affordable Housing Strategic Recommendations report. And then lastly, the Increasing Workforce and Affordable Housing in Charlotte report that was done. There were numerous websites and other advocacy and stakeholder input was provided to help inform this work as well. Next slide. So as a result of the input from the interested parties, the work groups, and the information that was received from various stakeholders in my discussions with the subject matter experts, there were a number of specific topic items that clearly arose. This is a list of those. The source of income discrimination, reentry housing, which we were just talking about for criminal backgrounds, boarding houses and commercial rooming houses, container homes, tiny homes, all dealing with similar sort of micro housing units. The duplex, triplex, and quadruplex structures being restricted to corner lots was a question. Use of the transit-oriented development zoning districts along bus lines, the substantially increasing the density bonus to hopefully drive more production of housing, land trust and use of public lands, inclusionary zoning programs, accessory dwelling units is a big topic we're going to hear more about, and we'll have some public testimony around that topic. An express approval process for affordable housing projects. The rapid rehousing program, which is formerly known as transitional housing, and city building fees, so more around engineering plan approval process. And then education on city funding programs and policies that support housing. Next slide. So all these topics cover a wide range of different challenges and barriers that potentially could inhibit the production and delivery of affordable housing and the desired outcomes that we've identified. So what I've done is a best effort at distilling those topic areas into some specific summarizations, and those are the items that follow here. The first one, identifying the housing gap. So the issue there is matching units that are available to serve the low to moderate income households with those units that are available. And that's a somewhat disjointed process the way it works today. And that could potentially be distorting some of the information in terms of the numbers of units that we need. The next item is the limited number of developers. The programs that are aimed right now at supporting the production of new and rehab units seems to be fairly well known and understood by only a limited set of more sophisticated kinds of providers, and seems to rely fairly heavily on nonprofits that do have some limited capacities. Around the regulatory cost issue, the overlay of cost that are derived from the processes that are associated with the review, approval, and construction of affordable housing units continues to be a deterrent for private sector participation in producing these units. We're hearing that this is a challenging process for regular market rate units, and there's no real benefit or incentive or motivation to go through that same level for these affordable housing units without having some kind of potential relief there. Next screen, yep. The limited resources for coordination and integration. This area really talks about the wide range of programs that are in place to deal with the various segmented problems that are contributing to a lack of access and availability of affordable housing. And that coordination potentially allows for some blind spots and for some gaps to occur. And an investment in the necessary resources aimed at more coordination and integration is often viewed as a soft cost and is less easily matched to a quantifiable outcome. So the quantitative outcomes that we tend to look for that are easily measured sort of push this sort of activity to a lower priority, and that's something that could possibly be addressed. The smaller affordable housing projects. This area really talks about the need to be able to make available funds that can support, more easily support small projects and make people aware of those funds that do exist, in particular projects that are from 5 to 20 units. And the sort of focus on the larger projects tends to encourage those large projects to be developed, and the lack of focus or awareness of the access to funds for smaller types of projects does not encourage those smaller projects to occur. In the 2021-2025 Charlotte-Mecklenburg Consolidated Plan, the city's housing market analysis cites that the 5 to 19 units represents about 67,000 units in the actual number of residential properties. And the 20 unit and above represents about 44,500 units. So if there were opportunities for those 5 to 20 unit properties to perhaps grow, the question is whether or not that could increase the supply of housing substantially. The regulatory challenges, this is an area that just came up when we talked about the reentry and how that should be handled. But there are clearly some state and federal regulatory impediments to the city being able to institute some of local policies that actually support increased availability and access to housing. And those things range anywhere from expanding the prohibitions on additional types of discrimination, which we talked about with source of income, all the way to funding alternative types of housing, which we also will talk about with respect to tiny homes and other types of innovative housing that might be used to help supply this. An example, an example of how this sort of impediment manifests itself is that around tiny homes, for example, the Manufactured Building Division of the Office of State Fire Marshal in North Carolina Department of Insurance issues guidelines on tiny houses in North Carolina. And they further cite North Carolina modular construction programs, the HUD Manufactured Housing Construction Program, Recreational Vehicle Industry Association requirements. And so all of those things are actual state laws or state rules that the city is somewhat hampered by in terms of what they can do in introducing these things into their housing code. So strategies around that, some political strategies, some programmatic strategies need to be considered in terms of some of these regulatory impediments. If we could go back to, yes, the next slide is there, the perceived barriers to entry. This is a conversation around the process of, how we allow and support the production of additional housing units. It's a fairly complex process, and it presents a rather high barrier for new entrants, particularly smaller entities who want to get involved in helping to address the housing supply situation and provide solutions. So that creates a lack of expanded capacity working on the problem. And then the issue of innovation and some of the perceived barriers around innovation. This is, again, a perception that some of the existing policy and program structures in and of themselves present significant barriers to the development of creative alternatives and new strategies for increasing the housing supply. And there seems to be very little space for testing and piloting new concepts by the city. And where that space does exist is really not very well known, nor is it understood how to navigate through that, those kinds of programs where they are available. And again, by way of example, in the Consolidated Mecklenburg Plan, the city cites one of the barriers to affordable housing is land costs continue to increase in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Land prices affect the cost of multifamily development and increase mortgage payment amounts for single-family home buyers. Along with land, the infrastructure requirements to support development have also increased. Infrastructure costs, along with land price increases, reduce the number of units coming to market that are affordable to low and moderate income families. And so the city is working on identifying these kinds of barriers, and they've laid out some solutions. In fact, to address that problem of land, they've implemented the guidelines for evaluation and disposition of city-owned land for affordable housing. This guidelines document sets out very clearly the purpose and methods for using city-owned land, and now needs to take the next step of how do we get that land into the hands of potential developers. So these are some of the challenges and barriers that have been identified as overarching kinds of things to be addressed. We'll be bringing forward recommendations around these. And what I've done is sort of consolidated this into really 4 particular focus areas. Next slide. And those focus areas will deal with the zoning ordinance accommodations, development fees and approval procedures, new housing ordinance and legislation, and under that we'll be talking about source of income discrimination and the housing reentry for criminal backgrounds, and then housing policy actualization. And we will have some public testimony at the next meeting, hopefully around the development fees and approval procedures, and also around the new housing ordinance and legislative issues. So you can get some additional feedback. And prior to the next meeting, I'll also provide you with some additional briefing materials to give you some additional information and insight on these topics. So when the recommendations come forward, you'll have a better sense of how to evaluate those recommendations. So that concludes my presentation for today. Again, hopefully at the next meeting, we'll have an opportunity to present these final recommendations, have some public testimony, and then move forward from there. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lindsay, for that very comprehensive outline of your work product, and we look forward to hearing the public testimony and the recommendations on next week. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Kathy for her first question. Kathy, welcome.
Thank you. Excellent presentation, Mr. Lindsay. Thank you for that. I'm wondering if under the regulatory changes that you will be recommending, if inclusionary zoning came up in the discussion at the state level. I know it's controlled at the state level. There's really nothing that Charlotte can do without having that state change. But did that come up in your discussion as well?
To be honest, this is probably, as you know, an ongoing discussion amongst stakeholders and housing providers in the Charlotte community. And there's division on this question, clearly. There is some interest in exploring that, and that there is a need to ensure that units are continuing to be produced. And this is perceived to be one way of doing it. The other side of the discussion is that, these types of programs have sort of a varied result when you look around the country. And in some cases, these programs are sort of ascribed to produce additional costs that increase the cost of housing and therefore have not proven to be effective and don't actually produce the amount of units that that people would hope that they would. So there's debate on both sides of it. Clearly, North Carolina has a rule that says that if we want to implement that, it does require additional state legislation. That is not at this time one of the recommendations that's coming forward from my work. I think that the council and the Good Neighborhoods Committee will need to continue to do further research around that and prioritize where an item like that might fit into its legislative agenda. Because it's on our list, I think that there are a number of things that I'm going to say are parking lot kinds of items, and that would be one of those. And those parking lot items are things that we need to continue to work on and continue looking at to figure out how can we best apply those to the situation that we're facing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I could argue both sides of that all day long. So thank you for that. Just wondering if you investigate.
Yes.
Lee, I'm sorry.
Quite all right. And if I'm premature in these questions and they'll be part of the recommendations, feel free. But thank you, Mr. Lindsay, again. Great presentation, a lot to chew on. I think my two questions / comments would be, one would be, I've gotten some emails and actually I've been looking forward to being educated as to that. Emails have said that the source of income discrimination to effectively do that or to get rid of that only requires local action. It doesn't require state action, which would be good news in the sense of if that's the easiest way to get to address it. I'm interested if you've already researched that and believe, kind of contrary to inclusionary zoning, you have one less hurdle on that. That's one question. And then the other would be, you specifically talked a lot about development fees. Coming from the multifamily world, I have a multifamily lens where for us, the fees associated from the city side are probably 80 to 90% are water and sewer. It's almost, to focus on the others would be kind of not worth the time, but the water and sewer is kind of the thing that is a large development expense. We do have county fees as well, and whether, I don't know if that's the same for a single family developer, but whether just narrowing the focus to something that, you know, is and I don't believe changing that would require any state action. It's really a local policy as to how do you pay for water and sewer globally. How do you allocate those costs? So those two are kind of questions / comments in terms of based on your presentation.
Great, thanks. I can address both of those actually, and unfortunately, the feedback that I'm receiving from legal counsels around this question of the source of income discrimination does not seem to lend itself to the city having the enabling legislation or authority to necessarily enact those things on its own. So it does appear that that's one of the items that, and we'll be making recommendations around that. That's one of the items that the city may need to seek additional authorizations to actually implement, depending on how you go about it. But as part of that discussion, I will also be bringing forward some other policy recommendations that the city may be able to implement, which would at least move us forward in addressing the problem. It doesn't get us all the way there, but I think it will get us part way there, and it will certainly start to move us down the road. So we are going to address that question, and I was hoping that you would be right in that we would have a clear path forward for the city to be able to do that on its own. With respect to the fees, we are really kind of focusing on the engineering plan approval process and the fees associated with that. On the multifamily side, clearly water and sewer tap fees are a big expense. On the single family side, the review and approval process can also become a fairly hefty process and expense. And it's not just necessarily the fees that are charged by the city, but it's also the costs that are incurred as a result of the process that one goes through with the review and approval of development plans. So, and that's what we're going to hear some more testimony around some of those things to kind of give people of how that also is a factor in the increased cost of delivering housing. It's the process piece also, not just the actual dollar fees. Although I did receive a fair amount of input from smaller builders who say that those costs, including sewer and water fees, add substantial amounts to the overall project cost when you get to the smaller projects, and therefore become even more barriers to being able to produce this housing. So there's a little bit of both in your in the question, and we'll talk more about that with the public testimony. We'll definitely be bringing forward some recommendations around how we look at that question.
Fred.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay, for a great presentation. I like the focus on innovation. I do think that we need to find new models to do what we do. I think one way to do that is by providing an incentive for developers to come up with ideas. Just as an example, Wells Fargo now in a nationwide competition called the Wells Fargo Breakthrough Challenge for Affordable Housing, whereby they are in cooperation with the enterprise communities, and they're providing a $2 million prize to find new models for developing affordable housing. I think it would be, and they've attracted hundreds of entries into that, including the Housing Partnership and others, to find new models. And so I think that may be something that we can look at here in Charlotte, just provide an incentive to developers to try new models, to create new models that, will help us with our future development of affordable.
Yeah, I think you're right on point, Fred, in that, one of the things that I discovered through my research, and I actually went to visit a tiny home community up in Flat Rock near Asheville, for example, as part of my research here. And that visit is kind of what led me to learn more about what is the state doing and what are other agencies doing that are involved in this process that may be creating some unintentional inhibitors. And one of the categories that I talked about and that we'll be looking at recommendation-wise is, for example, if we are tracking and counting mobile homes, RVs, and other kinds of dwelling units, we have a count for those in our plan, but we don't really have a mechanism to support the use of those kinds of dwelling structures or dwelling units in our housing program. We don't have a funding mechanism for that. There are a number of things that are permitted in our zoning code. The ADUs is just one example, but there are a number of other things that are permitted in the zoning code that are not being actively implemented in our community that would provide additional housing solutions. That's where boarding houses and commercial rooming houses came up. So we need to look at whether or not we can have funding structures that support these other types of what we want to call innovative. Some of them are. I talk to people who are producing container houses. They've got similar kinds of challenges because until it's affixed to the ground, as you know, it's not real estate. And that means it cannot be financed easily. That means it cannot be treated as real property. It's going to be treated as personal property. So there are a number of things around this that we need to look at, and there certainly needs to be further investigation around all of these. But that area of innovation seems to be a place where there's very fertile opportunity. And other cities around the nation are already engaged in it, and there's some best practices in place right now for how you go about doing that. So I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's an ongoing kind of effort that we need to engage in, and we need to do it quickly.
Connie?
Hi. That was an absolutely fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. As we're looking at the I'm sure the universe of research that you discussed and the materials, if it's possible, we always typically focus on housing trust funds, but I know that the city finds innovative ways to put money into these projects that are more than just housing trust funds. There are SIP funds, there are TIG funds, there are a number of different ways. And I'm just wondering what the controls are for these recipients of these funds. Is it contractual, or what other ways do we have of requiring that they accept a voucher, or that some of these other forms of payment for rents that we're looking at in terms of SOID research that you are doing? So if we can just understand that, that would be fabulous as well.
Great. That is one of the areas that I'm researching and am expecting to bring forward recommendations around, and more from a policy standpoint than actually a regulatory standpoint. I think, again, it appears that the housing code, the Charlotte City Housing Code, is a fairly prescriptive document and set of rules that the state sets out, which the city has to really kind of abide by to a large extent. And anytime you deviate from that, you've got to kind of get some approval around it. So from a policy perspective, though, I think that there are some mechanisms that can be put in place to ensure that we achieve some of the outcomes that we're designed to achieve, especially around the use of the funds that the city itself adds to projects. So that's an area, and I think that that's really where the TIGs and the SIP type funding come into play. And those are areas that we should definitely be looking at and trying to figure out how do we control those grants and those awards in a way that helps to achieve these outcomes that we're looking to accomplish. So yeah, we're going to bring something forward on that point too.
Thank you so much. And then I would just add one more to Lee's list of items, and that is building permit expenses. Those can also be very high for affordable projects. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Winston.
Yeah, I guess three areas of questions and comments, kind of what Connie touched on, specifically around the area of the smaller developments, those 5 to 20 units. I agree that there needs to be more focus on here. I would love to, if part of the direction of that also went horizontally, as I mentioned earlier. I think that there is more that can be done internally with economic development incentives. If we really do think of those 5 to 20 units, especially for local developers and landlords. Local developers and landlords, those are small business owners. So how do we support them? We, as it was said in the presentation, we really have looked at those larger projects to get some of the other city priorities like sidewalks, intersection improvements. That's why it makes more sense to use some of those incentives. But how do we kind of look at what we're doing in a different way to get some of the more things that we want? I would also I know that there's been a lot of talk from a couple different folks about the reduction of fees, and I just want to temper that. I feel like my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is potential discussion as we continue to grow, as we continue to try to figure out how we fund things like mobility and more equitable development around the city, that there might need to be increase of fees, particularly on market rate projects to facilitate those types of funds. So I know we would all love to get rid of fees, but those things have to get paid for. So I don't know how far down the road we want to talk about reduction of all fees. In terms of source of income discrimination, I've always felt like there needs to go. We need to think beyond just the legislative changes that happen. Let's assume we were to be in a situation that there was a rapid increase of voucher acceptance by legislative change. What are the real challenges that landlords face that do accept vouchers, and what role would we have to play from a government or city perspective to facilitate that rapid increase? I really haven't heard anybody talk about that, and I think we need to really wrap our brains around that.
Excellent points.
We have had some discussion around that, and in fact, one of the documents that I'm going to provide, which is actually in our Dropbox already, so it's available to you now if you'd like to look at it. But in Livian, who manages the voucher side, and I'll just talk about that for a moment, but who manages the voucher side, they have actually done that kind of background research and surveyed the landlords that are participating in the program and those who have declined to participate, to get a sense of what are those kinds of barriers to them utilizing the vouchers. And they have made or implemented actual changes, and I'm sure Connie can speak more to this, but they've made actual changes in how they are actually executing the program to accommodate that. And I believe that because there's a finite number of those vouchers, and I'm again just focusing on vouchers, there's a finite number of vouchers available to be utilized. They currently are, they have capacity to manage that process. So the utilization of all of the vouchers that are out there, for example, does not appear to be a burden on their operation because they're kind of already set up and prepared for that. But let's also talk about all of the other sources of income that that could be used in the case of a rental. And so, for example, right now we're awarding CARES dollars and providing rental subsidy with that. We work through nonprofits, our nonprofit partners, to provide that rental subsidy on an ongoing basis for people who find themselves short of being able to make rent or short of being able to make a utility payment and so forth. So the question really becomes how much funding can we allocate, can be utilized and is available to continue to support those growing needs. And those needs are growing rapidly, obviously, which is why we are looking to address these issues. So I think that while we are looking at what we are hoping to accomplish, what our desired outcome is, there is going to be some amount of sort of retooling that may need to occur around how we operate through our nonprofit partners, how we coordinate, and that was one of the topic areas around this coordination of efforts. There may need to be more a resource given to how do we evaluate those connections and linkages to ensure that we are making everything kind of tie together more seamlessly. For example, and I just use transitional housing as one example, or what we call rapid rehousing now. If we have dollars that are being utilized to house people and those dollars carry with it requirements for the recipients to enter into a lease agreement, for example, and that lease agreement is for a period of time that may be beyond what that individual recipient actually needs to be in those housing units. Are we now making the best use of those available units? Is there a possibility for those people to be case managed and move through the process in the system more quickly? So that's just an example of coordination, making things work. But there may need to be some retooling. But I think that from a voucher standpoint, that the Enlivian has the capacity to manage the utilization of all their vouchers. And I think that the nonprofits who currently are doing this kind of work probably have similar capacity. I don't know if Rhonda or Connie might have additional comments on that.
Okay, Councilmember Eggleston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lindsay, for all your work on this. I think you've touched on a couple of things that Council has demonstrated an appetite to address before, and frankly, we just haven't gotten across the finish line. So I hope that we will be able to do so now. My question is probably for Ms. Weidman, but anyone who wants to can field it, to make sure that we don't create a situation where we shoot ourselves in the foot process-wise and risk having a challenge against how we went about getting to some of the things that I think a lot of us would like to address. Are there a few things that we're talking about in a kind of narrowly focused COVID task force that should come to the full council as recommendations from the Great Neighborhoods Committee so that there's no either real or perceived process misstep by having brought them forward to council from a COVID task force, and they might or might not be COVID related? Does that make sense?
That does, Mr. Eggleston, and thank you for bringing that up. I think particularly this body of work, because as you can see, there are many things here that we need to discuss, and we also need to involve our colleagues from a legal perspective and also from a planning perspective. So I do think particularly many of the things that Mr. Lindsay has discussed, touched on today, need to, it would be my recommendation respectfully that they would go to the Great Neighborhoods Committee.
Might we then, process-wise, as this task force, because I'd love to have the task force stamp on these things, might we as a task force whether it's, I don't know, it might be next Thursday at our, I believe, final meeting, might we refer those items to the Great Neighborhoods Committee where they could then properly be referred? I mean, I don't necessarily care how we get to it. I just want to make sure that someone can't come back around and say, well, that wasn't COVID related, so it shouldn't have been referred out of a COVID task force. And it seems like it could be cleaner and safer to send it in whatever fashion you think is appropriate to Great Neighborhoods and have it referred by that committee, which certainly has the standing to undertake that conversation to the full council for a vote.
Sure, and I'll yield to Mr. Graham and his thoughts on that and any discussions that he might want to have with the mayor as well.
I think this is a great time to pivot and talk about exactly just that. And Councilmember Elliston, we're on the same page, and we've had a conversation with Commissioner Lindsay about a week or two ago about the same topic. As many of you know, that a lot has happened in our community over the last 3 or 4 weeks, even going back to June, that has caused the mayor to do a realignment of our work. And so our focus as a task force will be coming to an end next Thursday, will be our last meeting. We talked about Mr. Lindsay's work plan specifically because it does talk about a number of issues that are non-COVID-19 related, but a number of council members have already expressed an interest in that we really do a deep dive in. For example, Mr. Winston talked about the source of income of discrimination, and that's going to be on the Great Neighborhoods Committee agenda first and foremost, and a number of the other recommendations that I think will be coming forward from Mr. Lindsay on next week as well. And so as we pivot back to our regular standing committees, and we had a meeting with the mayor on yesterday in terms of establishing the work assignments for the various committees. Part of the discussion was, one, making sure that the recommendations that the task force has submitted to the city council passed through the Great Neighborhoods Committee to ensure that, in fact, that the council process is not circumvented, but certainly just dotting I's and crossing T's, as Councilmember Elliston has suggested. So we will do that. And then secondly, simply because a number of the recommendations, and I just want to thank Mr. Lindsay for the detailedness of his work, because there are a number of topics that I know I am interested in, Mr. Winston, Ms. Johnson as well, that we need to process through the committee so that we won't lose the value of the work. And I've already invited Mr. Lindsay, when we do reconvene, to come before the Great Neighborhoods Committee to make sure that we don't lose anything in the transition. And that offer will also be made to the other leads who have already made recommendations to the City Council, so that we won't lose anything in the transmission of the information. I think, Deronda, you had a question?
So I did have a comment, but after listening, Councilman Graham, thank you for acknowledgement. I took my hand down basically because of a comment that Council Loughlin, I think I was getting ready to get down further in the weeds about the programmatic challenges around the vouchers, et cetera. So while I do have the floor, I would like to just go ahead and say that what we find is that property managers are willing to work with us with some vouchers, but they really want to work with people that have support service and, more important, that are working. And so it's not, I just want to say that because I don't think we talk about it. It's not that people just discriminate against vouchers. It really is because they sometimes deny individuals as well. Whether it's criminal records, whether it's not being employed, not having support services in place. Just based on your comment, though, about we were wrapping up today, I know in August we were going to talk about homelessness. And so I guess we're not going to be talking about that with the task force group, but I feel confident that I'll continue to work with the city staff people, in particular Pam Wyman, around some of the challenges that our homeless persons are facing in this community. So thank you.
Deronda, thank you very much. And as a part of the reassignment of our work for the council, we did talk about that. And correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Winston, I think you may be tackling that issue within one of your committees based on our reassignment of the work. And I'm almost certain, Deronda, that he will be calling on you. And always, I think you always have a direct link with Ms. Weidman and the city staff because we work on these issues each and every day with you. And so we won't lose your voice on that topic. And certainly Mr. Winston is more than a worthy advocate through his committee for that work. Mr. Lindsay, I just want to again thank you for your work. We look forward to your recommendations next week. A part of next week's work, Mrs. Wyman, will be just maybe a summary from me, so we can know where we started and where we have ended our work. Also, there'll be some special recognitions from me to each and every one of you for, really putting the service and community over the last 12 weeks, your ideas, your concept, your thoroughness of the work, and your dedication to the work of COVID-19. We know that it's not over yet, and we still got work to do. So we'll just summarize our work next week. Please know that each and every one of you will be on speed dial, at least with me, for your advice and consultation. If there's not any other questions from the committee, I'll open it up for final questions. If not, we will adjourn, and then we'll reconvene next Thursday. We will hear from Mr. Lindsay. We will finalize our work, and then we will give each and every task force member the appropriate thank you on next week.
Mr. Graham, I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Comment. I wasn't able to raise my hand. I'm sorry. I just wanted to thank Mr. Lindsay for the presentation. I thought that was so comprehensive, and just thank you and the rest of the group. This group has been an honor to be a part of, because I think we've tackled so many big issues in the affordable housing, such as the ordinances and the eviction intervention, and just all of these big issues to really move forward with trying to make some progress in the affordable housing crisis. I do want to say, and I don't know if this is a consideration, but I think the beauty of this group is that we've had input from the community. So I don't know if, and I know this hasn't been the structure of our committees, but I don't know if having a standard or a standing member from the community on the committee to bring that perspective is an option. And maybe not just this committee, but to take a look at that as a whole. I think these task force have shown us something as a council. So that would just be a question or maybe a suggestion that the council can think about. And also next week, are we going to look at the entire housing framework and kind of summarize where we are, like particular items? I know we've received some comments and some suggestions from the One MEC. So are we going to take a look at the framework and really start to put some teeth and some action and some time frames on how the committee will take a look at the issues that weren't discussed during the task force?
Yes, I'm going to summarize the work of the task force. One of the assignments that the mayor outlined yesterday was the housing framework. So that is a chore that the Great Neighborhoods Committee will be taking up. Matter of fact, I think it's the first item that she recommended that we do. And so that work will shift to the Great Neighborhoods Committee. And then for the first point, It's really a council committee, and I think I can't speak for the mayor of the council, but I think I think the council would want to keep it to the council. But as always, there's always input at every council committee meeting for the public to come before it and provide comments. And so I think the framework, I think next week what I'll try to do, Ms. Johnson, and I'll work with Ms. Weidman to kind of summarize the work of the committee, the task force, and then kind of provide the appropriate handoff to the Great Neighborhoods Committee. Mr. Winston.
Thank you. I just have one question. Ms. Metz had mentioned the potential presentation around homelessness to the committee, and I know that does particularly around the displacement of homeless tents in city. Camps. I was wondering if it was going to touch that because that is specifically COVID related. Just wondering. I know we have talked about it at the beginning of this task force, but was wondering where that conversation was potentially going, and if we can have it.
Yeah, so our COC group and some folks I have been working with to prepare for a presentation in August. We'll still keep talking because it just wasn't for a presentation, right? It was for us to come up with some solutions, and it did include those folks in the tent. So if there's no place on the agenda to have it, we're definitely welcome to talk with you about it one-on-one.
Ms. Wyman?
So, Ms. Metz, thank you, and I appreciate always the opportunity to work and talk to you and brainstorm with you about that. We will, you and I had some initial conversation as we were preparing for this topic within the task force, so I will commit to following up with you after this meeting and figuring out how, if nothing else, maybe we can do an overview of at least what we were talking about within next week's meeting, if that's okay, just so the task force has a little bit of an insight as to what the thinking around the homelessness, because you're right, it is exacerbated by COVID-19.
And then, Mr. Winston, I think the handoff, based on the meeting we had yesterday to the mayor, if I'm correct, is to you and your intergovernmental relations because of the social service aspect, working with Mecklenburg County and others. So it can be really a tee up for you to kind of give it to you. All right?
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to talking with you, Pam. Thanks.
All right. If all minds and hearts are clear and no further questions, this meeting is officially adjourned.